Carl Jung. He was treating a 38-year-old patient, a woman he described as psychologically masculine. She dressed in a deliberately neutral way, avoided makeup altogether, rejected any expression of femininity, as if it was some kind of moral failing. And when Jung asked her why, she couldn't answer. She only said that the idea of being feminine disgusted her. That's when Jung asked the question that changed everything. When was the last time your mother complimented you on your appearance as a little girl? The patient froze, and after a long silence, she answered, "Never." And right there, in that moment, Jung identified a pattern, one he would see repeated dozens of times. Narcissistic parents don't need to physically abuse their daughters to destroy their femininity. The process is invisible, systematic, and it starts so early that the girl doesn't even realize she's being psychologically amputated. And the most shocking thing, she spends her entire life thinking the problem is her, that she was born wrong, that her femininity is defective, when in reality, what happened was a psychological murder of the feminine archetype. And you're about to understand exactly how this works. Before we continue, I need you to understand something. If you're a woman and you've never felt truly feminine, if you look in the mirror and don't recognize beauty, if you reject makeup, dresses, or any expression of the feminine, if you feel uncomfortable with compliments about your appearance, or if you've developed a deliberately masculinized persona, this isn't random. It's not a manufacturing defect. It's the result of a specific process that Jung mapped out, and it starts with the death of the anima. Jung discovered that every human psyche contains both masculine and feminine elements, regardless of biological sex. He called the internal feminine aspect the anima, and the masculine the animus. In a healthy woman, the anima is integrated. She feels comfortable with gentleness, receptivity, intuition, beauty, sensitivity. She accesses the archetypal feminine without guilt. But in a daughter of narcissistic parents, something catastrophic happens. The anima is systematically attacked until it dies in childhood. And here's the mechanism. Narcissists operate from unconscious envy. They can't tolerate qualities that they themselves have repressed. And femininity, especially in its purest manifestations, like natural beauty, emotional sensitivity, or intuition, triggers this envy. So what happens? The narcissistic father ridicules his daughter when she gets dressed up. The narcissistic mother criticizes her teenage daughter's body. Both systematically invalidate any expression of the feminine, and the girl, who depends on these parents for psychological survival, makes the only choice she can. She kills the feminine within herself, buries the anima, develops a masculinized persona as a defense, and spends decades thinking that this amputation was her choice. Let me show you how this works in practice. Jung treated a patient named Emily. She was 35 years old, worked in finance, dressed exclusively in power suits, hair always pulled back, zero makeup, zero jewelry, zero expression of femininity, and she proudly said that she rejected gender stereotypes. But Jung noticed something. She wasn't rejecting stereotypes. She was rejecting the feminine in herself. And when he asked about her childhood, the story emerged. Emily's mother was a covert narcissist, never physically abused her, never yelled, but she did something much more destructive. Every time Emily, at 6, 7, 8 years old, got dressed up, put on a dress, or asked to wear makeup like her mother, the answer was always the same: a look of disdain, a subtle comment, "You're looking vulgar, that's too flashy, you don't need that," and the most lethal makeup is for insecure women. The message was clear: Femininity is shameful. Beauty is vulgar. Getting dressed up is a sign of weakness. And Emily, desperately wanting her mother's approval, internalized everything. By 12 years old, she had completely killed the anima, developed a deliberately masculinized persona, and convinced herself that this was empowerment, when in reality, it was psychological survival. And here's what Jung identified as most devastating. Emily didn't know that she had been psychologically mutilated. She thought her choices were authentic, thought she really preferred power suits, hair pulled back, zero femininity. But Jung asked a simple question. If your mother died tomorrow, would you dress differently? And Emily started to cry because the answer was yes. And that meant she had spent 35 years living not as herself, but as the version that her narcissistic mother approved of. The anima was dead, and Emily didn't even know it had been murdered. Now, pay attention, because here's the pattern that Jung saw repeated dozens of times. The destruction of femininity in daughters happens through 5 invisible mechanisms. And if you're a woman and recognize 3 or more, you were a victim of this process. Mechanism number 1, invalidation of natural beauty. The 6, 7, 8-year-old girl naturally experiments with femininity. She wants to use her mother's lipstick, wants to put on a pretty dress, wants someone to say that she looks beautiful, but the narcissistic father or mother never does this. They ignore it, or worse, they ridicule it. Say she's being dramatic, that she's seeking attention. That beauty doesn't matter. And the girl internalizes. My femininity is irrelevant. My beauty has no value. I don't deserve to be seen. This kills the anima at the most basic level. The girl learns that expressing femininity results in rejection, so she stops expressing it. Mechanism number 2, destructive comparison with other women. The narcissistic mother does this in an especially cruel way. She compares her daughter with cousins, friends, or even celebrities, always in a way that makes the daughter lose. Look how delicate Jessica is. You could be more feminine like her. Or, your cousin is so beautiful. Why don't you take care of yourself like that? The message is devastating. You're not feminine enough. Your femininity is defective. Other women have something you don't. And the girl, unable to compete with impossible standards, does the only thing she gives up completely. If I can't be feminine the right way, I'm not going to be feminine at all. The anima dies by comparison. Mechanism number 3, punishment of emotional sensitivity. Daughters are naturally more connected with emotion, intuition, sensitivity. This is part of the archetypal feminine. But narcissistic parents don't tolerate this. They punish any expression of emotional vulnerability. The girl cries, "You're weak." Is she afraid? You're dramatic. Expresses sadness. You're manipulative. And here's the poison. The girl learns that feminine sensitivity is a defect, so she buries it, develops a layer of emotional hardness, a masculinized persona, one that rejects feelings as weakness, and spends decades disconnected from intuition, from vulnerability, from emotional depth, because all of these qualities were associated with punishment in childhood. The anima was psychologically amputated on an emotional level. Mechanism number 4, invasion or neglect of the developing female body. This is especially destructive during adolescence. The girl is developing breasts, hips, menstruation. Her body is becoming feminine, and the narcissistic parent reacts in a pathological way. Either they invade, making sexualized or critical comments about the developing body. Your chest is growing, you need to cover up more. Or, your hips are getting wide. watch your weight. Or they neglect completely, treating the bodily changes as non-existent or shameful. The girl never receives healthy validation that her female body is good, normal, beautiful. So, she develops deep body shame. She spends her entire life uncomfortable in her own skin. She rejects feminine clothing because it reveals a body she's learned to hate. The anima cannot inhabit a body that the girl rejects, so it dies. Mechanism number 5, and this is the most invisible of all, modeling the rejection of the feminine. The narcissistic mother, and especially, models for her daughter that femininity is weakness. She herself rejects softness, receptivity, vulnerability. She prides herself on being tough, on not needing anyone, on being strong like a man, and the daughter absorbs. Being feminine is being weak, being strong is being masculine. To survive, I need to kill the feminine in me. And so, the narcissistic mother transmits to her daughter the same complex that she carries. The rejection of the feminine archetype passes from generation to generation, and the daughter unconsciously replicates the pattern without ever knowing that she's been programmed. But there's a 6th mechanism that Jung identified specifically in fathers, not mothers, and this is devastating in a different way. It's the sexualization or total rejection of female development. The narcissistic father either treats the daughter who is becoming a woman as a sexual object, making inappropriate comments about her developing body, or he does the opposite, completely withdraws attention, as if the daughter has become repugnant upon developing feminine characteristics. Both destroy the anima. In the first case, the girl learns that femininity attracts predatory attention, so she buries it to protect herself. In the second case, she learns that femininity makes her invisible and rejected, so she abandons it to regain her father's love. Either way, the message is, your female body is a problem. And the anima cannot inhabit a body that is a source of trauma. Now, here's what Jung discovered that is absolutely shocking. When a girl kills the anima to survive psychologically, she doesn't just lose external femininity. She loses access to entire parts of herself. She loses intuition. She loses the capacity for emotional receptivity. She loses connection with the natural cycles of her body. She loses the ability to simply be, instead of always doing. Because all of these qualities are linked to the archetypal feminine, and when the feminine is buried, all of it goes with it. Jung called this psychological amputation. The woman remains alive biologically, but psychologically, she is operating with half of herself. The masculine half, the animus, assumes total control. She becomes hyper-masculinized, competitive, productive, rational, but completely disconnected from softness, from intuition, from vulnerability, and the most tragic part, she doesn't realize what she's lost. She thinks that this is her natural personality, when in reality, it's the result of specific childhood trauma. And here is where it gets even more destructive. Jung mapped out how the death of the anima doesn't just affect a woman's relationship with herself, but all of her relationships, especially romantic ones. A woman with a dead anima cannot receive love. She cannot be vulnerable. She cannot relax into feminine polarity. She competes with partners instead of complementing them. She controls instead of trusting. She does instead of allowing. And when the partner tries to connect with her on a deep emotional level, he encounters a wall because the emotional femininity, the receptivity, the softness, all of that was murdered in childhood. And now, as an adult, She unconsciously replicates in relationships the same dynamics that she experienced with her narcissistic parents. She rejects her own feminine before it can be rejected by others. Let me give you an example that Jung documented. A patient named Stephanie came to him at 42 years old. 3 failed marriages, all ended the same way. The husband saying that she was emotionally inaccessible, that he couldn't connect with her, that it seemed like she didn't need him. And Stephanie didn't understand. She was successful, beautiful, intelligent. Why did the relationships always fail? Jung asked the right questions, and the story emerged. Stephanie's father was a grandiose narcissist. When she was a child, he praised only achievements, high grades, sports trophies, public performances. But when Stephanie cried, when she needed comfort, when she expressed vulnerability, her father disappeared. He literally left the room. The message was clear. You are valuable when you are strong. You are rejected when you are weak. Femininity is weakness. So, what did Stephanie do? By the age of 10, she had already developed a hyper-masculinized persona. Never cried, never asked for help, never showed vulnerability, and it worked. Her father finally approved of her, but the cost was the death of the Anima. And now, as an adult, Stephanie couldn't relax into femininity in relationships. She competed with her husbands, proved she didn't need them, rejected help, and when they tried to care for her, she pushed them away. Because care, vulnerability, receptivity, all of that was associated with paternal rejection. So, she replicated in relationships what she learned in childhood. Being feminine is being abandoned. Better to be strong and alone than vulnerable and rejected. Jung spent months working with Stephanie, and the turning point came. When he asked, "Have you ever allowed any man to see you cry?" Stephanie froze, and after a long silence, she answered, "No, never, because if I cry, he will abandon me like my father did." And there was the paternal complex running automatically, destroying every relationship. Stephanie wasn't choosing the wrong partners. She was sabotaging emotional connection, because emotional connection required accessing the Anima. And the Anima had been dead for 32 years. The cure for Stephanie was devastating. Jung said, "You need to do the thing that scares you the most. You need to allow yourself to be vulnerable with a man. Cry in front of him, ask for help, show weakness." And Emily resisted for months, because to do it was literally confronting the deepest terror of childhood, being rejected for being feminine. But eventually, she did. She entered a relationship, and for the first time, when she felt like crying, she didn't suppress it. She cried, and the partner didn't leave the room. He held her, and something inside Emily broke. The association between femininity and abandonment began to dissolve. The Anima began to awaken, back to Jessica. After months of therapy with Jung, she finally admitted the truth. She hated the way she lived, hated the power suits, hated the emotional hardness, hated looking in the mirror and seeing a woman who looked like a man. But she was so afraid. Afraid of what? Jung asked. And Jessica answered, "Afraid that if I allow myself to be feminine, my mother will reject me completely." And there it was. Even at 35, even living far from her mother, even financially independent, Jessica was still living for maternal approval, still sacrificing her true self, so as not to lose the conditional love of a narcissistic parent. The Anima was dead. Because keeping her mother was more important than keeping herself, Jung then did something radical. He said to Jessica, "You need to choose. Either you keep your mother happy and remain psychologically dead, or you betray your mother and rescue yourself." And here is the truth that no one wants to hear. You cannot heal the wound of destroyed femininity without betraying the maternal or paternal complex. You cannot rescue the anima and maintain the approval of the narcissist. It's a choice, and it's the hardest choice a daughter can make. Jessica took 6 months to make the decision, and then she did. It started small. She bought a dress, felt massive narcissistic guilt, as if she were betraying her mother just by wearing something feminine. But she continued, let her hair down, experimented with makeup. And something extraordinary happened. She began to cry, not from sadness, from recognition. She looked in the mirror, and for the first time in 30 years, recognized the little girl who had been buried. The anima was coming back to life. But here's what Jung warned. The rescue of the anima is not linear. It's not simply starting to wear dresses and that's it. It's a deep process of confronting the parental complex. Every time Jessica dressed in a feminine way, the voice of her mother surfaced. You're looking vulgar. You're attracting attention. You're being weak. And Jessica had to consciously choose not to obey, had to tolerate the narcissistic guilt, had to endure the feeling of betraying her mother, and do it repeatedly until the maternal voice lost its power. This took 2 years, and in the end, Jessica wasn't just dressing differently, she was different. There was softness in her gaze, emotional receptivity, connection with intuition. She had rescued parts of herself that had been dead since she was 8 years old. The anima was alive, and for the first time, Jessica felt complete. But there is a detail that Jung observed that is absolutely crucial. When Jessica finally confronted her mother about her childhood, about the years of invalidation, about the systematic destruction of her femininity, her mother denied everything, said Jessica was making things up, that she was always free to dress as she pleased, that there were never any criticisms. And here's the pattern. Narcissists never admit the destruction they've caused. They rewrite history, make the daughter doubt her own perception, and if the daughter insists, they play the victim. You're attacking me. You're being ungrateful. I always loved you. This is gaslighting on the deepest level, and the daughter needs to understand you will never receive validation from the narcissist, will never hear, yes, I destroyed your femininity. I'm sorry. That's not going to happen, and waiting for that is remaining trapped. Jessica finally accepted. She stopped waiting for her mother to acknowledge the damage. She validated her own experience. And that, Jung said, is the moment of true individuation. When you stop seeking external approval and start operating from the integrated self, when you rescue the anima, not to prove something to anyone, but because you deserve to be complete. But before I give you the healing protocol, you need to understand something that Jung discovered about the archetypal dimension of this wound. Because it's not just about your individual mother or father. It's about the archetype of the Great Mother. In the collective unconscious, Jung identified that the Great Mother has 2 faces: the Good Mother, who nurtures, protects, validates, and the Terrible Mother, who devours, suffocates, destroys. A healthy daughter internalizes the Good Mother and develops a positive connection with the archetypal feminine, but a daughter of a narcissistic mother internalizes the Terrible Mother. And here's the problem. She doesn't just internalize the personal, narcissistic mother, she internalizes the destructive aspect of the entire feminine archetype. So she doesn't just reject her own femininity, she rejects the feminine as a universal principle. This means that the wound is deeper than you imagine. It's not just, my mother didn't validate me, it's the entire feminine is dangerous. The feminine devours, the feminine destroys. Better to reject it completely. And this creates dissociation, not only from one's own femininity, but from everything that is archetypally feminine. The woman begins to reject lunar cycles, reject intuition, reject the body, reject receptivity, reject the yin principle. Because all of this is contaminated by the experience with the terrible mother, Jung called this the negative maternal complex. And it's not healed just by resolving the relationship with the personal mother. It requires reconciliation with the archetypal feminine, reconnecting with the great mother in her good face, and that is deep work. Jung recommended that women with this complex work with symbols of the positive feminine, the moon, water, earth, the goddess in her nurturing forms, Mary, Demeter, Isis, because these images reprogram the unconscious. They show that the feminine can be safe, can be nurturing, can be powerful without being destructive, and slowly, through repeated exposure to these symbols, the association between feminine and danger begins to dissolve. The woman begins to internalize. There is a feminine that does not devour. There is a mother who does not destroy. And I can connect with that energy without being annihilated. Now I want you to understand something. If you're a woman and you're listening to this and recognizing the pattern in yourself, you are not alone and you are not broken. What happened to you has a name, has a cause, and has a cure. But the cure is not cosmetic. It's not just starting to wear makeup or dresses. It's a deep work of confronting the parental complex that's been running unconsciously inside you for decades. It's recognizing that the critical voice that attacks your femininity is not yours. It's your mother's or your father's. It's an introjection, and you have the power to expel it. But even more than that, it's about reconciling with the archetypal feminine. It's about healing not just the personal wound, but the collective wound. Carl Jung developed a specific protocol for this, and I'm going to share it with you now. First step, somatic recognition of the wound. You need to feel in your body where the rejection of the feminine is stored. For Emily, it was tension in her chest. For other patients of Jung's, it was stiffness in the hips or tightness in the throat. The body holds the memory of when you killed the anima, and you need to access it. Not intellectually, somatically. Feel it. Breathe. Locate where the wound is. Second step, naming the critical voice. Every time you think about dressing in a feminine way and hear a voice saying that it's vulgar, that it's weak, that it's wrong, you stop and ask, whose voice is that? It's not yours. It's your father's, your mother's. It's the parental complex speaking, and you name it. That's the voice of my narcissistic mother. It's not my truth. Just naming it takes away 50% of its power. Third step, micro acts of betrayal against the complex. You don't need to make a radical transformation all at once. Jung was against that. He said, start with micro betrayals. Wear a lipstick, let your hair down, buy a feminine piece of clothing, and observe. The narcissistic guilt will arise. You'll feel like you're betraying your parents. Good. That means you're on the right path. Feel the guilt. Don't run away. And do it anyway. Repeat it. Each micro-act of betrayal against the complex weakens the parental control and strengthens the true self. Fourth step, external validation of healthy femininity. You need role models. Jung recommended that patients seek out women who integrate the feminine and strength, not masculinized women, not women who reject the feminine, but women who are gentle and powerful, receptive and assertive, vulnerable and strong. You need to see that femininity isn't weakness. It's completeness, and that reprograms the unconscious. Fifth step, mourning what was lost. Here's the part that many women avoid. You need to grieve for the girl who was buried, for the teenager who never felt beautiful, for the 25-year-old woman who rejected dresses because she was ashamed of her own body. You lost years, maybe decades, disconnected from your femininity, and that deserves mourning. Cry, feel the anger, feel the sadness. Because only after mourning comes reconstruction. Sixth step, and this is the final one, conscious, repeated choice of the integrated self. Every day, you're going to have to choose. The voice of the parental complex will continue to arise, but now you know it's not yours, and you consciously choose not to obey. Choose to get dressed up, choose to feel beautiful, choose to access gentleness, choose to validate your own femininity, and do it repeatedly, until it becomes automatic, until the anima is permanently integrated, until you are complete. And there's a seventh step that Jung considered essential, but that many modern therapies ignore: specific somatic bodywork. Because the rejection of the feminine isn't just in the psyche, it's stored in the body. Jung observed that women with a dead anima have specific body patterns: tense and raised shoulders, as if they're always in a defensive position, locked. Disconnected pelvis, shallow breathing, in the chest instead of the abdomen, clenched jaw. These are somatic defenses against the feminine. The body literally shuts down to avoid feeling gentleness, receptivity, vulnerability. And these defenses need to be dissolved. Jung worked with patients using what he called somatic active imagination. The woman was instructed to breathe deeply into her abdomen, to loosen her pelvis, to relax her shoulders, and observe what arose. Usually, memories arose. The 7-year-old girl being ridiculed for being delicate, the teenager being criticized for developing a feminine body. And with the memories came the repressed emotion: anger, sadness, shame, and finally, deep crying. Jung said, the body is finally releasing the armor. The anima is coming home. Emily went through this process, and she described it as devastating. She said that when she finally relaxed her pelvis and breathed deeply into her abdomen, she felt like she had accessed a part of herself that had been frozen since childhood. And she cried for hours, not just from the pain, but from the relief. The body could finally relax. Finally, it could be feminine without being in danger. And that, more than any intellectual insight, was what brought the anima back permanently. Now, let me tell you the end of Emily's story. 3 years after starting therapy with Jung, she was a different person, not because she changed her clothes, but because she rescued entire parts of herself that were dead. She had reconciled with her body, she had developed deep intuition, she had connected with natural cycles, and more importantly, she had broken the generational cycle. She would never have children, but she worked with young women and made a point of validating the femininity of each one. Of saying, you are beautiful, your sensitivity is strength, your femininity is not weakness, because she knew what the absence of those words had done to her. And she refused to allow another generation to be psychologically amputated. Jung wrote about Emily's case and said something that needs to be repeated. The destruction of femininity in daughters isn't an accident. It's a systematic pattern perpetuated by narcissistic parents who themselves reject the feminine. And if this pattern isn't consciously broken, it passes from generation to generation. Narcissistic grandparents create narcissistic mothers, who create psychologically masculinized daughters, who create even more disconnected granddaughters. The cycle only breaks when a woman awakens, recognizes what was done to her, and chooses radically different. So, if you're listening to this and recognizing the pattern, here's what you need to know. You have every right to feel feminine, to get dressed up, to feel beautiful, to access gentleness, receptivity, intuition. That's not weakness. That's not vulgarity. That's not betrayal of any real value. The only thing that would be betrayed is the narcissistic complex that your parents installed in you. And that complex doesn't deserve loyalty. It deserves to be expelled. The anima in you isn't dead. It's buried, and you have the power to unearth it. It's going to hurt. It's going to generate guilt. Your parents are going to punish you for changing, but on the other side of this process is the complete version of you. The woman who integrates strength and gentleness, reason and intuition, productivity and receptivity, masculine and feminine. And that's the woman you always should have been. Before they taught you that half of you was unacceptable, Jung ended Emily's case with an observation that he made several times. Individuation isn't about becoming something new. It's about reclaiming what was always yours, what was stolen from you. Emily didn't become feminine in therapy. She rescued the femininity that was murdered at 8 years old. And every woman who has gone through this process of destruction has the same right. To rescue the little girl who was buried, to rescue the anima, to rescue herself, and finally, for the first time, to be complete. According to Carl Jung, this process of reclaiming one's inherent wholeness is a fundamental aspect of psychological healing. If this resonated with you, share in the comments what you recognized. And if you know a woman who rejects her own femininity, share this video with her, because maybe she doesn't know that what she calls a personal preference is actually the result of narcissistic programming, and knowing that is the first step towards healing. Carl Jung believed that acknowledging the shadow self, the parts of ourselves we reject or disown, is crucial for individuation, for becoming a whole person. Understanding the influence of narcissistic parenting can be a powerful step in this process, allowing us to reclaim the authentic self buried beneath layers of imposed identity.